When you're thinking about portfolio construction, given that there's this increasing role of private markets and more money's flowing into private markets, like, does that change how you think about traditional portfolio construction? Like, is the 60-40 approach at Coda dead? How do you define your portfolio construction now?
I'd say that the 60-40 at Coda did not exist.
Okay.
We were fortunate enough when the business started 10 years ago that we started with a blank sheet of paper. So, we looked across the spectrum of asset classes. We looked at all the top tier global investors, and, a good example here locally is Australia's Future Fund. If you look at how they invest, they're not just investing in listed markets. So they've got a very low exposure, in fact, to Australian equities. It's really? About 10% of that entire portfolio. Private equity makes up about 13%. Infrastructure makes up about 10%. Then they've got higher allocation to global equities. Timberland sits in there as well. So like forestry, credit, and everything else in between. But for us, we looked at models like that, and given we had the ability to access all of those different markets, and our clients are a bit more sophisticated than the average, and they're the types of opportunities that they demand from us. So when we started our business, it was just looking across the full set of investable opportunities and determining what model did we want to follow, and that model that our portfolio is more aligned with is what we call the endowment model, which, if you look at your big university endowments like Harvard and Yale overseas and how they invest, there is a larger weighting to private assets.
Yeah.
And that's also by nature of the fact that, these endowments are very large. They've got very different liquidity requirements than the average person. So they can deploy a higher percentage of their capital into those asset classes than what, the average person can be. But, we certainly learnt from those models that if you give up and you're willing and able to give up a little bit of liquidity, there is a certain premium that you can earn for forgoing that liquidity.
And so, like, I know you're not going to be able to answer specifically, but like in general terms, if you were to try and bucket percentage weighting towards public versus private in a general Coda portfolio, like what is the split?
So to answer your question directly, I would say, we'd have anywhere from 20 to 30% in private credit. And then outside of that, if we separate it out into defensive alternatives and then growth alternatives, but there'd probably be another 10 or 15% in defensive alternatives. So that's things like unlisted or private infrastructure assets. And then alongside that, we have a third bucket that's growth alternatives that once again would be 10 to 15% depending on the individual that we're advising. One of the unique things about our value proposition to clients is that we create completely bespoke portfolios. Yeah. So whilst we have what we call reference portfolios. So we've got a big investment team of about 12 people that put together these core portfolios, and it's based on a risk profile, which you'd be familiar with. So call it a 50-50 growth versus defensive split, 70-30, 90-10. So 90-10 being your more aggressive, 50-50 being your more defensive. When we're building out those portfolios, they're to act as a reference, which means it's then down to us, the individual advisor, to intimately know and understand our clients. And we don't necessarily align them 100% to what our investment team may put together. If a client, for example, has a desire to have more exposure to private markets, we can dial that right up to 100% if they want to have just private equity in their portfolio. And, typically that's not our average client. They don't look like that. But if it's someone that's they're operating a business and they're a young accumulator. Like I work with a bunch of people who are in business still, mid-40s and 50s. They've got an operating entity on the side. They've already paid off their home, bought an investment property, and the business is spitting out surplus cash flow. And they've still got a long runway between when they want to retire, for example. And if they're in business, they understand business and they typically like those differentiated investment opportunities, private equity being one of them.